and it moves us on to the next part of our agenda, our action agenda. Item 12, action is necessary or appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make a motion that the board approve selected employment items, Exhibit A for action.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes, I saw Ms. Snipes. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0. Do I have any other motions in executive session? Mr. Hogan.
Yeah, pertaining to C, I'd like to make a motion the board approves the administration's recommendation of awarding Brownstone Construction Group the contract for services of construction management services for the Irma High School project.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes, I heard Ms. Snipes. Any discussion? Ms. Huddle?
I'd like to amend the motion to modify 11.3 to replace the words fee draw schedule and the rest of that sentence with the words Exhibit B, and to delete the fee draw schedule from the list of other documents under 13.2.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Any discussion?
The reason I'd like to do that is just to clarify it, because right now the other documents list a separate document for the fee draw schedule, and there isn't a separate document for the fee draw schedule. It's actually Exhibit B. So I just feel like this change is necessary to ensure clarity.
I just want to clarify that because I did not say this. Ms. Barnhart seconded the motion, just for record keeping, sorry. Any other discussion on Ms. Huddle's amendment? Mr. Scully.
Yeah, I don't believe it's necessary, and I know we can't talk about what was said during executive session, but we did not receive legal advice saying that it was necessary. So I think we're good the way it's written, and I would move forward that way.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll welcome Mr.
I mean, can we
We've
ask?
already gotten it. I mean, if
I
he
understand
answers, but we've already gotten legal
clarity,
advice.
I guess the clarity of the contract, if that change was made, would it be executed pending a signature from our vendor?
Mr. Reiser is in attendance, so I don't know, Mr. Reiser, if you want to comment or if everything was said and back.
Repeat the question.
I guess the question pertains if Ms. Huddle's amendment to the motion passes, would it, the contract would have the amendments on our end and that would be submitted to the vendor for their approval?
We would have to go through the process again of having them approve it, and then I don't know that we have to bring it back to the board, but it wouldn't be signed tonight.
Okay.
All right. So we have a motion on or amendment to the motion on the table, and I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion? All opposed? That amendment fails 5-2. We have an original motion on the table, so I'm going to call for the vote on that. The not original amendment, original motion on the table. I'm calling for the vote on the original motion. All opposed? That motion carries 6-1. And I believe that's it for executive session. And that moves us to item 13 on the agenda. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan?
I'd like to make the motion that the board follows the recommendation of the administration for the approval of the resolution ordering a referendum to issue not exceeding $240 million of general obligation bonds, including the referendum question to appear on the general election ballot November 2024.
Do I have a second? Mr. Scully? I saw Mr. Scully's hand first. Sorry, Ms. Snipes. Any discussion on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I will.
Oh, wait.
Ms. Huddle?
I have something I'd like to enter into the minutes, and I'd like to read it as well. First of all, I want to note that I support the renaming of Dutch Fork Elementary School to Rich Lex, no matter what happens with the bond referendum. It's just the right thing to do, and it shouldn't matter. Doing that should not matter whether or not we have a bond referendum. We should do it, and I would like to put that on, request that we put that on the agenda for our next session to go ahead and do that. I'm going to vote against the bond referendum, and I want to say why. I've got 4 reasons that I'm going to vote against it. The first is that there's nothing in it to expand the capacity of Chapin High School. While it includes some very much needed projects, it will max out our borrowing without addressing our most pressing facilities issue, the overcrowding and the projected continued enrollment growth at Chapin High School. If it passes, we will likely face another tax increase in the next few years to either increase the capacity at Chapin High School or to make Spring Hill High School a zoned school. Second, we have increased maintenance and operating costs, and they will decrease the per-student funds that are available for teaching. That's how it works. We get a ball of funds for operating expenses, and every dollar we spend one place, we don't have it elsewhere. It increases the total number of facilities that we have to support with operating funds at a time when our overall enrollment is actually decreasing. So as a result, the money that we have to address student-to-teacher ratios, staff and teach salaries will be diminished because we're going to have to pay to replace turf grass or whatever other expenses are needed. And that leads me to unknown cost. We have not received, as of yesterday, let alone discussed, how much our operating expenses are going to increase, and new administrative positions will be added that will be needed for these new facilities. And when I say new, I'm not talking about replacement. I'm not talking about replacing the existing Dutch Fork Elementary with a new elementary school. I'm talking about net new facilities. We also haven't received, let alone discussed, cost estimates for putting this measure on the ballot and the other expenses for, that the administration plans to incur if we vote yes tonight. We're abdicating our fiduciary responsibilities to our students, teachers, staff, and community if we vote yes on this before we have received and discussed these costs. And frankly, I believe we're setting a very poor example for our students regarding commitment to large expenses without due diligence and budgeting. And lastly, but most important, we have missing financial guardrails. We don't have a board audit committee as recommended by our auditor. We don't have an internal auditor as required by policy. We don't even have a permanent CFO. In other industries, these yet-to-be-installed guardrails would be in place, and they would be supplemented by a well-established team of in-house specialists in construction and financial quality assurance, before such large expenses would be considered. Earlier this year, we heard a refrain of micromanagement from some of our board members when other trustees tried to ensure that we followed state law regarding budget transfers. They even voted against getting an AG opinion. Fortunately, enough trustees voted in favor, and the AG wrote that we were charged with that responsibility. Before we pass a $240 million bond referendum, you need to know that we have a board that's going to follow the law and our fiscal responsibilities, and we're going to question things when we need to question them. So my ask for my fellow board members tonight is this: please vote no on this proposal tonight. Let's work together with teacher, parent, and community representatives to build a better plan, one that addresses security, our pressing needs, and the growth in Chapin, and does so without increasing our operating costs so that we can fully invest in our most important resources, our teachers and our students.
Ms. Snipes.
I am in support of the bond referendum, and I am not going to vote no. I feel like we've spent a lot of time in this room going back and forth on this. We've requested a lot from our district staff. They've answered every question. Dr. Ross and his team have come back and responded to every concern that we have had thus far. And I do believe it's time for us to vote in support of this and support the people that we're entrusting to tell us what they need from us in the district. And I also just wanted to touch on the first thing you mentioned, which is that we haven't addressed the growth in Chapin High. But I think we can all agree that the schools in Chapin are some of our newer facilities, and that may be an issue that we have to deal with at some point. But I think in the process, some of our schools and other clusters have not gotten the time and the attention that they need. And I think this gives us an opportunity to do that. And voters will have the opportunity to side with us or not when it's election time.
Anyone else? Mr. Satterfield and then Mr. Hogan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Ms. Snipes. We have been through this long, arduous process. We've hired firms to come in and evaluate our schools, all our schools, give us scores, tell us all the things that are wrong with our schools. And I can tell you, I've been in this district for 33 years. We have a lot of schools that are just in disrepair, and it would be a shame to not address these. When I was the principal at Chapin High School, we went through the process of a referendum, and during that planning phase, we got the same sort of input from all these agencies and these recommendations, and we were going to build a school with 10 extra classrooms because we could see the growth at Chapin. We got so much of a firestorm and feedback. How dare you build a school with all these extra classrooms? You'll never fill those classrooms. Lo and behold, Chapin is full. They have come. People do come to a district where the schools are in great shape, and these children deserve a school that they're proud of. It's kind of like all the testimony we heard during the public participation. I feel like we've been through this. Dr. Ross has answered a myriad of questions. We've had gone through all this process, and I disagree, and I don't think that the situation with regards to the AG's commentary really goes along with the referendum. I think those are two separate issues, in my opinion. So I disagree, and I think that this, again, if those of you who have been in this district for a long time, and I was born before the 58 or whatever you said, do know that you remember when a lot of these schools were new. Those of you that went to Irmo when it was a bright, shiny building, walk the halls at Irmo now and see. The new area is very nice, but the rest of the school, the other old part, is like a lot of our schools. We've got plumbing issues, we've got sewage backing up. We've got a lot of things that just need to be fixed. And I don't believe that not approving a referendum is going to be any less expensive. We're going to have a lot of projects and continued maintenance, huge maintenance issues that we're going to see. But that's just my opinion. But I'm very much in favor of this referendum.
Mr. Hogan.
First of all, I appreciate the civility. The last time this topic of conversation came up about 2 years ago, I was in the minority that voted for it. Bond referendums are tricky depending on how you want to look at it. And, if you gave Matt Hogan the crystal ball, I don't know if I would necessarily do all of these projects, but at the same time, I know it's not my decision. And then it is partially my decision as to how we put it on a ballot for every person in this community to make their voice be heard as if this is the right decision or not. So, with that being said, I'm ready to move forward and give the taxpayers the ability to vote at the ballot based on their interpretation of it.
Anyone else? Ms. Barnhart?
Yeah, I'm still really tight on this. I do agree with Ms. Huddle's statements, and I will echo her request that we can get the renaming of Rich Slex back to its former name out of respect for the people in attendance here today and those who pass through those halls. I think it's very important to do regardless of the bond referendum. And there's so many things on here that are so important. Like Mr. Satterfield said, there are a lot of things that really do need to be done, and the security aspects of it I'm very much in favor of, and so many of the other things, but I can't disregard what Ms. Huddle said in what she stated, because there's a lot of questions and concerns that I've heard from the community, parents, teachers, members of the community, and so I just wanted to state that. But I do also agree that, this is a question that's going to have to go to our constituents, and our constituents will ultimately make that decision, so, yeah.
Mr. Scully, do you want to say anything before I do? Okay. Just wanted to give you the opportunity. I agree with my colleague, Trustee Hogan, on the civility of this conversation. This is a conversation that we have been having for several years, even before I was on the board, but it's in earnest. Since I've been on the board, almost 4 years, this is the second time that we have brought a referendum question to a board to decide on whether or not to put the question on the ballot for the voters to decide. And as Dr. Ross and I have had many conversations about the first time that this question was brought to the board, and I'm recapping this because not everybody pays attention to every meeting and every conversation. And when you're making a decision to put $240 million of taxpayer dollars on a ballot, it is not one conversation. It is months and months and years of conversation to get it right. And the first time that Dr. Ross brought us this question, some of the concerns that I had where I was not in support of putting it on a ballot had to do with the fact that we were just coming out of COVID and having in-person meetings had not really transitioned to where they are now, and attendance at online forums was not very high. And one of the things that I have heard over the years, because I am not originally from the Irmo Chapin area. I moved here, about 11 years ago and had a child 10 years ago, and we chose District 5 specifically to live in because of the great schools. And so when I came in, I heard about the 2008 bond referendum. So as a parent and a citizen and not a board member, the wife of an educator, I heard all of the concerns about that 2008 bond referendum and projects that were approved or not approved and prioritized and not prioritized, and I heard all of that feedback. So when we had that original conversation about a question on the ballot, one of my concerns was that the projects were changing every board meeting. And it might have been to appease board members or appease community members and getting all of the feedback the way that we were getting it. And not in it just because we couldn't all come together and have so many, and we were trying to get it done so quickly because we have urgent needs, especially in our Irmo schools. We were trying to get it done, but it just wasn't consistent. We didn't have necessarily agreement on what those priorities were, on what the projects were. They were changing, and I think the board as a whole, that's why we one of the reasons why we decided not to put it on a ballot. And we gave Dr. Ross specific feedback on why it was not put on the ballot at that time. We needed extensive community feedback, forums at our schools, at all of our schools. We needed to know what it looked like for a potential rezoning, which is, the pariah of any elected official on a school board. Nobody wants to rezone because it upsets someone. But that doesn't mean it's not necessary, and it doesn't mean that you don't need to identify what that looks like when you are talking about capital needs and where that goes in the future. So we had those conversations. We had conversations on what those priorities were on studies. We got another study, and we've had so many studies and spent so many dollars on studies that haven't had any action taken on them that I feel like that's a waste of money. We have to just pull the Band-Aid off at some point. This is not us voting on a bond referendum. I'm not telling you if I'm in support of a bond referendum or not. I'm trying to make a decision as my individual self, as a trustee, if we have gotten as much information as we can reasonably get to put it on a ballot, to answer questions, educate the public, and let the public decide. If the public comes back and says they're not in support, well, we did our due diligence. You're not going to have every single question answered every single time when you're talking about things like this. There are unanticipated circumstances. We could tell you one thing and then something that we didn't anticipate come up and that kind of change it. So we have to do the very best that we can do. And I want to commend Dr. Ross because I feel like him and his team have spent countless hours. We've gotten tons of emails. We've gotten tons of feedback on what those projects are. We've done our very best to anticipate what the costs of these projects will be, up to almost $240 million. The reality is, we might not have gotten that right. It may be that we start working on these projects and we don't get through that list because inflation comes up, costs come up that we don't know. But we have to at least start taking, in my opinion, the first step to allow the voters to decide, are y'all in support of this or not? We've given the vote, we've done everything that we reasonably can to get feedback from the business community, from parents, from just regular citizens that don't have kids in our schools. We've done everything that we can to do that, in my opinion. And at some point, you have to, like I said, you have to pull the Band-Aid off and make that decision. So I do feel like we have spent the time. I will also say that putting a bond question on the ballot is a political thing. I mean, you can always argue different sides, and not everybody is going to agree on whether or not we should have it on the ballot or not have it on the ballot, whether or not we should vote for it when it's on the ballot or not vote for it on the ballot. I think personally, each of us individually have our own reasons for putting it on the ballot or not, but that is what we're doing. We're putting it on the ballot and we're giving it to the voters. I'm re-emphasizing that because it is not like we're just trying to take advantage and waste tax dollars or break the law or anything like that. I don't believe there is one person on this board that is trying to do that. I will say about the AG opinion that Ms. Huddle referenced. We are discussing that opinion in executive session at our next meeting. I also don't necessarily think that everybody has accurate information yet on what that AG opinion means. We have counsel that is meeting with the Attorney General's office to get clarification because my original review of that AG opinion kind of lends to what you say, but that's not what our lawyer has said. So I'm curious to what the AG's office and our lawyer is going to say, because that's not what we were told. There's bigger concerns with the AG opinion than just the budget request that was brought to the board. And I was told that I was wrong on that. So I want to know. And I'm sure the public wants to know. So we haven't even gotten to that yet. And I don't believe, and to be clear, I believe our board wants to do everything legally. I don't have a problem with the AG's opinion. It is an opinion. It's not, binding law, but I think that, we should give deference to it if it says what we, all I'm saying is that we don't have that information yet, and I don't think that anyone on our board is trying to break the law or waste money, and I think we've all worked tirelessly, and politics aside, because we don't all agree. And I don't, I'm not running for re-election. I have 3 kids and I'm fighting cancer, and I want our kids to go to the very best schools. And a child at Nursery Road should be able to go to the same type of facility as a child at Piney Woods. They shouldn't have to worry about waste coming up in the floor. I mean, we're getting emails from parents at Nursery Road that are just outraged that we're even questioning this. Our facilities are not the best. And, that might not be a popular thing to say out loud, but it is the truth. So put it to the voters. And that's what we're going to do.
Ms. Hahn.
And I'm going to let Mr. Scully talk, and then Ms. Huddle, if you would like to close, you can.
Yeah, just real quickly. Dr. Ross had brought up a good point. I really appreciate the job that you and your staff have done working on this. I think you did a phenomenal job. You answered our questions. You've gone above and beyond. And I'm in support of the referendum. And Dr. Sumter, Mr. Bowman Jr., Mr. Halterwanger, and Mr. Boyd, we need your help to get it passed.
We also need to have a conversation about what we can and can't do after this vote. Ms. Huddle, I'm going to let Ms. Huddle go, and then we've all spoken, and I'm going to call for the vote.
I just want to clarify, because some comments were made about the things that we need, and I fully support probably 80% of this. I mean, we definitely need, every child deserves a quality school regardless of where they live in our district. The walls are needed at Nursery Road. We have to fix, it is not about that. My concern is fundamentally that I don't think we have the financial guardrails in place to manage $240 million, and that there are some projects on here that I'm hearing from people in the community are not as important as addressing the growth in parts of our district. So I just want to make it extremely clear, I am fully supportive of fixing our schools, replacing what needs to be replaced so that every child, regardless of where they live, attends a quality school.
Okay, I am calling for the vote. We have a motion on the table to approve a resolution ordering a referendum to issue not exceeding $240 million of general obligation bonds, including a referendum question to appear on the general election ballot November 2024. All in favor of this motion? All opposed? Abstaining?
Abstain.
All right, so that motion carries 5 yeas, 1 nay, and 1 abstention. And I would also just like to note for the record, because we did have some comments today, that resolution question does identify the renovating the Dutch Fork Elementary School into the Rich Lex Educational Center. So that is in the question. The naming of the building is in the question on the ballot. Just because you may not have seen this, I just wanted to throw that out there to the public, that that is what the name is, how the name is incorporated into the question on the ballot. So that motion has carried, and we will go into item 14, which is the first reading approval of fiscal year 2024-2025 general budget. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make a motion the Board of Trustees approve the first reading of FY 2024-2025 general fund budget in the amount of $240,100,000 to
Oh, yeah, okay, go ahead.
$236 with an operating millage rate remaining unchanged at 266.0 mils, and approval of the first reading of the fund balance assignments to include $3,211,334 for employee retention incentives to be paid November 24, and $1.5 million for portable classrooms.
And do I have a second? Ms. Snipes, I heard Ms. Snipes. And discussion, so I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Ross and to Ms. Rawls.
All right, Ms. Rolls?
Okay. I wrote a little bit of a long recommendation, but it had to encompass all the pieces. Thank you for the opportunity to present the 24-25 general fund budget plans for your approval and for first reading. You can see in red all the items that we have completed, and we are at May 20th for the first reading. We'll get the ad to the newspaper tomorrow to be published by May 31st, and we will do second and final reading on June 10th. At this time, the conference committee has not met, and the plan would be, dates I'm hearing is that the conference committee report will be out by June 18th is the date that I'm understanding. So some things that we've talked about before, the state level has set the salary scale for minimum salary schedule for teachers with a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience at a minimum of $47,000. That's the same in both houses, so that is locked. That will be what we will be held to. One thing that is different is funding for state-aided classrooms using the education formula. In the Senate, it's $200 million statewide, and in the House, it's $230 million statewide. A couple of things to note. The Board of Economic Advisors met today. They have identified $142.6 million in recurring dollars and an additional $467.2 million non-recurring dollars that they will have access to above and beyond what the legislature had when they planned the budget. But understand, education funding will be between $200 million and $230 million. They cannot go over the $230 million that was in the House formula, because that's the two limits from both houses. So we will be somewhere between 200 and 230. If we end up closer to the 230 million end, that will be an additional $2.7 million budgeted for education for District 5. That was the difference between the two models, $2.7 million. So we're hoping that the conference committee will adopt at the 230 million level so that we will have an additional revenue available to also enhance some of our programs that we provide students that maybe we tried in ESSER and they were good, but they weren't as good as some that we have carried through in the budget. This would be for an amendment for you all to approve later in the fall. So it's nothing is going to change between today and the second reading. That 2.7 million, if it becomes available, or whatever amount becomes available, would be for you all to budget come fall. There also is the health insurance increase, 11.8% in both the House and the Senate, and the bus driver salary increase. There's a difference there, the House at 1.5%, Senate at 2.75% on the minimum schedule, not on our schedule. We have to increase based on the minimum schedule for that. And if you all want to ask questions as I go through, I'm fine with that, or if you want me to finish the presentation, it's whatever works for you.
I have a question about that June 18th date. So the June 18th date is when they come out of conference committee, and that's when it's decided?
The plan is for the report to be presented June 18th, yes, ma'am. And then we go to the governor for ratification or vetoes, and they still go through that part.
Okay. So when we're approving this for second and final reading, that's going to be before that 18th conference committee, or should that be at that June 24th meeting?
It will be before. However, note, I have taken the more conservative route with this, so we are on the Senate financing plan right now. It can only go up from where we are.
Okay.
The revenues are not, I have taken the conservative approach, so I'm budgeting based on the $200 million number, and that's the lowest it can come out of the conference committee.
So if it's higher, do we adjust down at a later meeting?
You would adjust your revenues up at your later meeting because we would have additional revenues that would be coming in. The revenue number can only increase. Because they're looking at the same percentages, they're looking at the same weighted pupil units and everything. It's just, do you have a $200 million pot or a $230 million pot? I've used the $200 million for my revenue estimates. If it goes up, we should experience a $2.7 million increase in revenue for state aid in the general fund. So based on all of our allocations.
Ms. Rawls,
Yes, ma'am.
real quick, I'm so sorry. I have a question from Mr. Satterfield.
Yes.
Ms. Rawls, can I ask a question about the health insurance?
Yes.
That increase, I know it's a pretty big increase. How much of that will be passed on, any of it passed on to the staff?
No, sir, it's all employer increases. And the employer health insurance runs on a calendar year basis. So we'll be working off of the ratios that we have been using through December, and the increase will be implemented in January. So it is only an employer increase.
So the staff won't incur any of those additional?
No additional premiums. I'm not sure exactly what their policy changes, if the deductibles are going up or anything like that. I'm not aware of that yet. That hasn't been announced, but there will be no extra premiums, no additional. So all funding for next year is based on the 135th day count. So on the last day of the third quarter for this school year, the average daily membership was 16,750.61. Translate that into weighted pupil units, because you know the students that have special needs, we get additional funding for them. We get additional funding for areas like gifted and talented, English language learners, and also pupils in poverty. So there's several different calculations that go into it. Vocational education is another additional weighting. So we come up with 26,574.42 weighted pupil units. There are a little over 1.3 million weighted pupil units in South Carolina as of the 135th day. So that's what we're comparing our 26,000 number with, is that 1.3 million, to figure out what percentage of the whole does District 5 represent. When we look at the minimum salary schedule based at 47,000, we have chosen to, within our means, set the proposed starting salary for a bachelor's teacher with 0 years at $47,500. In addition to that, they have the option of the NARI program where they can take the direct payment of $2,500, or they can have that $2,500 sent to their loan servicer to be applied against their student loans.
Ms. Huddle?
The NARI program, how many years do they get that?
That'll be 3 years.
So it's $2,500 per year?
Yes, ma'am.
So a total of $7,500?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So that, in essence, while it's not $50,000 in salary, it does provide $50,000 worth of salary and benefits in a monetary way to our starting teachers. I mean, I think that's an awesome opportunity for a teacher to come to a great district like District 5 and still realize the $50,000.
And so that $2,500 that is for 3 years, that will stay in place even if the General Assembly comes back and raises the minimum starting salary for teachers, because I know that the governor's plan is ultimately for every district to be up to $50,000. So technically, we're at $50,000 right now, and it's going to go up based off of whatever if the General Assembly sets that number, and we typically adjust accordingly, and then we still have that $2,500.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The salary schedule is set, so our salary will be the $47,500. However, I think you're referring to the initiative to get to $50,000 by 2026. So as long as the board is in favor of the NARI program, then that would continue. So some things that are included in this budget, we looked at these last time. The cost of the new salary schedule, $1.45 million. The health insurance increase is approximately $1.3 million. We have a 2% increase in a step on the support staff and the admin schedule. FICA and retirement related to those increases, $1.1 million, and the increase for the bus driver schedule and a step, $90,000. So we're looking at $5.79 million related to potential benefit and salary and benefit increases. There has been a request from 6 schools, 3 schools for AAPs and 3 schools for APs to increase the days, one from 190 to 210 and one from 190 to 215, to help with some of the administrative things that they have to go through in the summertime while teachers aren't in the building, but they can get the work done and be ready for the next school year. That would be $65,000 salary and benefit cost. The cost to continue the ESSER 3 positions that were in the ESSER 3 budget that will end September 30th. The general fund will not start picking up salary for these positions until October 1st. They will be continued to be funded through ESSER for the first 3 months of the calendar year. That's $1.2 million, and that will cover the social workers and the clinical counselors that have benefited our students as they come off of the backside of COVID and readjusting to what it looks like to be in school these days. The ESSER 3 programs and supplemental pay, continuing those programs at $525,000, salaries, benefits, services, and supplies. We will continue the community support position, transferring that to the general fund at $165,000 cost, salary and benefits. And some of the additional considerations, like we talked about the NARI program, $375,000. Some of that they take as salaries, some of it are payments to educational loan servicers. We have the First Jobs program. Everybody is very well aware of the increases in energy supplies and services as inflation continues to grow. Well, hopefully it's slowing down a little bit based on what I've been reading. Repurposing a position in HR, reclassifying 21 FTEs as recommended in the salary study. We talked about this last time. These are positions that were identified as being documented below market minimum. 21 FTEs would benefit from that. And also increasing 2 FTEs to be from a partial FTE to a full FTE in music and 1 in special ed. Wanted to discuss with you all some fund balance assignments. This fund balance assignment is $1.5 million. That number was in the budget this current 23-24 school year. Solicitation was issued. There were no responses to that solicitation, and the understanding is just because there was not enough time to deliver by June 30th. So we are requesting that and we will talk about this more towards later in the presentation, but recommending that we continue to earmark those dollars for portables whenever we do have the time and we have these supplies and the equipment available that we can purchase it. We think that's an important fund balance assignment.
Ms. Hunt, are these portables, they were originally budgeted for Chapin High School. The intent now is for Chapin Intermediate?
I will defer to Dr. Ross or Mr. Wiseman.
Mr. Wiseman?
Yes, ma'am.
So could that change, because the nature of the motion has the 1.5 for portable classrooms, but it is not identified for a specific school, and there's not a specific time frame based on the motion about when the money would, like, you know, because we're waiting on the reissuing the solicitation and having more time to get all of that stuff situated. My question is there a possibility that you would come back to us and say, okay, we've readjusted because we are making these decisions on potential anticipated needs, like originally the anticipated need was at Chapin High School, now it's at Chapin Intermediate. You know, things change, like these are all made on like predictions, and sometimes enrollment changes and things are unanticipated. That $1.5 million that we would reassign based the fund balance, is that a possibility that you'll come back to us and it's not exactly all of it's going to Chapin Intermediate?
That possibility is certainly there. We would like that flexibility. As we look a year out, we thought it was at Chapin High School, then we see the growth at Chapin Intermediate. It would have to be approved by this body, of course, but we would like that flexibility.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the motion is written correctly and that our expectations, because that was a little bit throwing us off with the Chapin High School and the Chapin Intermediate. Ms. Huddle?
Did the motion actually mention because that was a question I had. I didn't think the motion actually mentioned the fund balance reassignments, and I was.
It does have that 1.5 for portable classrooms. First reading of the fund balance assignments to include $3.2 million for employee retention incentives to be paid in November of 2024, and the 1.5 for portable classrooms, with board approval required before the purchase.
I don't know if this would be a motion or a board chair's decision, but I think it would be best to bifurcate the question and separate into three. I think it's better in the minutes and in the decisions when you have the fund balance assignments separate from the budget approval.
Right, so I'm gonna make that executive call to go with the budget, with this, because it's in the minutes, in the recommendation, and it'll be written in the minutes for this motion. But I appreciate that consideration. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, though, as we're going forward with the motion, that the way that it's written, and just for the record, that it's not, that this motion does not identify the school, but it does identify that there does require board approval prior to the purchase of the portables. So that will be a conversation for the board when it comes back to us about where that's going and explanations of why we're making those decisions. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, Ms. Ross.
No, you're fine. So when we look at the revenues, you can see the local revenues calculated at 260 mils, and you can see the state aid to classrooms. The $76 million number in the projection for state aid to classrooms general fund, that's the number that I'm discussing, could have the potential to increase 2.7 million. So that's where you would see the increase in revenue. And you can see I noted that we did use the Senate version here. We did not go with the House version. So in this model, the local revenues are 36% of the total, and 64% is state revenues and other financing sources. The $15 million at the bottom, the state aid to classrooms EIA, that comes into us in an educational improvement account, Education Improvement Act account, and so it is a transfer into the general fund on a monthly basis. So we're looking at revenues increasing 3.48%. And when we look at the projected general fund expenditures, the same 3.48% increase with salaries and fringe becoming 87.5% of the total expenditures, and supplies, services, and equipment 12.4% of the total. And just note, I'm not sure if you've paid attention to our neighboring districts. We are balancing this budget without the use of fund balance, and that's not happening around the state. So I want to make sure you understand, this is a budget to where it is based on the revenues that will come in the anticipated revenues for the 24-25 school year. Based on the board policy and my belief, we do not use fund balance for recurring costs. And I just wanted to make a note that we are balancing this budget without the use of fund balance. So when we go in to calculate the allowable millage increase, which we're not recommending, but showing you the calculation, we do have a 1.64% population growth and a 4.12 consumer price index growth, allowing us to increase our millage by 5.76%, which calculates into 15.32 mills. And with the 30.01 look back, the allowable millage increase would be 45.33 mills. And based on the value of the mill rate is $304,061. You can see what it would equate out to as far as what impact it would have on the general fund if we were to increasing the bill to the taxpayer of investment property, not owner-occupied property, of $408 a year on a $150,000 house. So as I said, this is your policy DFAB on fund balance. Fund balance should not be used for recurring budget needs, and the fund balance on average will change from time to time. However, you've established a 15% to 18% of the future year's general fund expenditures. So being where our fund balance should be would be between the $36 million number you see there and the $43 million number, based on what the general fund anticipated budget will be for the 24-25 school year. And as a review from June 30, 2023, this is where you were. All this information came out of the 2022-2023 annual report. Total fund balance was $56,020,807, but the unassigned fund balance is what we're talking about being between that 15% and 18%. That is the fund balance that is used whenever we're anticipating tax revenues to come in when the cash gets lower in the fall months of the year. And you can see the assignments that were approved last year. So for this year, these are all projections, all estimates. This is what I see as of today. I anticipated $4 million in prepaids based on the last couple of years as an average, calculated what it would cost to do a $1,000 bonus for all the FTEs in the district, and you're looking at grossing it up for the FICA, the $3,211,334. The portable classrooms being a fund balance assignment. There again, both that would require board approval prior to for $1.5 million. You previously approved future potential capital expenditures of $3.5 million, and you also approved 6 FTEs for teaching in critical needs areas. I changed the number on that, but that's just to associate it with the salary schedule that's been proposed. So it's the same line item, I just equated it to the 24-25 salary schedule. That would leave an unassigned fund balance of $41,464,541, which is 17.2% of next year's general fund proposed budget. So we are falling within that 15 to 18% that you've identified in the board policy. And Dr. Ross, I think.
Thank you, Ms. Rolls. At this point, I just wanted to pause into the presentation. This is a discussion that I want Ms. Rolls to take the heat for, so I'll go ahead and share what the philosophy was in setting the pay scale. I want us to kind of go back to our final presentation from the salary report that was given by Evergreen Solutions. This was on April 14th of 2023. To highlight the major parts of their implementation recommendations, you recognize that we have multiple different pay scales, the certified, the classified, and the administrative. Their recommendation was on certified to increase about 6.6%, for classified 4.2%, and for administrative 2.9%. These estimates did not include benefits, so this was just the base of going up. When we looked at this last year, this was a lot and to increase at one time, so we wanted to hit that in 2 years. If this budget passes, what you will see, if we look at it over 2 years, just adding those percent increases up over 10 years, for administrative, that would be plus 7%. For classified, that would be plus 7%. For the bus drivers, that would be plus 20%. And for the teachers, that would be plus 12%. So I just wanted to, and that includes, we are adding in benefits to that. So they get that plus on just base, and they get the benefits. So we're working very hard to make sure. We can't control CPI or inflation, but we are doing everything on our part to not only give our teachers the raise that they deserve, but our administrators and our staff. I want to share, though, some other budget considerations. As Ms. Rawls said, we're not using fund balance to balance this, but you have to understand the work that the finance team had to do to get us to this end. The state scale is not our scale. The state scale goes from 0 to 28 years in what we call 5 lanes. The lanes are based on your degree as a teacher, bachelor's plus 18 hours of study, your master's plus 30 hours of study, and doctorate, for a total of funding 145 sales. Our scale goes out to 33, so that's 34 lines, so that's 170 scales. What's important to know is that the 145 sales of the state are not funded at 100%. We get 64 cents on the dollar, so local has to pick up that other 36 cents. For the sales that are beyond the 29th year, it doesn't matter if you're at 30 years experience, 31 years experience, you're going to get 28 years of experience rate from the state. So we pick up all of that on the local side. So it is important to know that we're making a huge investment to our teachers with our salary scale. Here's the difficult part that is important to understand as we go into the next slides. We want salaries to increase with years of service. That seems very obvious, but in delivering that, it is very complicated. In theory, the state salary scale would move like this. It would be a nice slope, sloping upward. So as your years of experience and your education increase, so would your pay. And then we would go above that line with our district pay scale, 1% above that line. And so with that, we could maintain that goal that as your education level increases, and your years of service increase, your pay would increase. Now, once you look at the theoretical scale line, and now look at the reality, this is how the state schedule actually moves. It's not that straight slope going upward. And so as a result, if you take the bottom lane, which is the bachelor's, and the state moves that up by 10%, but they're not moving the entire scale up by 10%, you actually flatline the back end of this scale, meaning you give a 10% increase to some employees and maybe a 2% increase to all. What we tried to do is balance this out where we can give those who work with us longer and are not funded fully in this increase, give them an increase worthy as well. So by going to 47.5, as well as lifting the back end of our scale, we came up with this recommendation that brings everyone with an average of 6%. When you look at the amount of money that you receive per increase year, you get this very funny graph here, where in the first few years of the state, and this is the old state scale, this is not the proposed new state scale, but the old state scale, of the amount of money that you make in year 1 through 5, and then in year 6, you start getting these huge increases. Well, trying to give everyone a standard increase on a line that looks like that is almost impossible. So we're working the best way we can to ensure that the amount of years and your education level works out to a raise. And so I applaud the finance team for working that out. And so we're going to show you just how some of that complication was worked out when we put this salary schedule together. So I just wanted to share with that. And so Ms. Rawls, you can share how we came to our final scale.
So what we're looking at here is comparing the District 5 23-24 schedule to the state's minimum 24-25 schedule. Based on this chart, we're only required to increase 22 cells. All of the other cells are higher than the state minimum already. So only the ones in red are the ones we are required to increase to be in compliance with the state minimum salary schedule. If we increased every cell by 2%, all the red cells would have a lower salary than they currently do. If I took the state minimum and added 2% to every cell, then all the red cells would be losing money. So I can't apply 1% to every cell in the schedule because of the way they calculate their percentages. It's not even percentages cell over cell. It is, for instance, when you compare the salary schedule we're looking at and proposing, the first cell, the bachelor's with 0, is about a 10% increase. And then the bachelor's line, as you go down, it ends up being about 5% when you get to year 28, because we're comparing it to the state minimum. And then you go to the top of the bachelor's degree with 18, and you may start about 6 or 7% increase, and it goes down. And it goes that way all the way through to where you're in the doctorate line, and you're really realizing about a 2 to 1% increase, but the overall average of the entire schedule is a 6% increase. Over all the cells can average together. The increases starts at 10, some get 1. That is purely based on how the state's minimum salary schedule was structured by the legislature. It's really a hard concept, and we were talking about this salary schedule this morning. About in 2019, they decided they wanted to increase the amount of money they were giving to the first 5 years of teaching, which is really what drove that line, because at the first year I think this was back when the salary schedule started at about $38,000. $38,000 was a big increase for that year, but the next year, when you got to be the year 1 teacher, you got $100 increase. And the year 2 teacher, you got another $100 increase. And then when you got to year 5, you shot up, and then it was pretty steady percentage of increase until you get to year 18, and then the increases dropped. So it's basically all in the way that the percentages work through the whole schedule. You just can't apply 1% to a percentage, not 1%, a percentage to the same percentage to every cell in the schedule, and be in compliance with the minimum salary schedule and provide a salary increase to your teachers. So where we are with our dates is we've done the discussion reading, we have gone through the sine die at the General Assembly, and we are at the first reading for approval of the 24-25 general fund budget and fund balance assignments, and this is the recommendation that Mr. Hogan read earlier. So I will be happy to answer any questions in the presentation or in the budget book that you received.
Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I'd like to applaud you for going through this whole process and looking for ways of, I know it's kind of like fishing, you know, if you want to throw that rubber worm out there along the edge of the lake, but once you hook them, you want to do more than just hook them. And I think with the rate of inflation and all that's going on, teachers are really watching this salaries study and the salary scales very closely. And that was the reason I had this question about the health insurance, and thank you for answering that. But a lot of folks are pinching pennies and trying to figure out how they're going to make it from, month to month. And we all know the value, and Dr. Austin and I used to have this conversation years ago, the value of a teacher with a lot of experience, and we were talking a little bit about this in our meeting earlier, but the ones that have that real knowledge base and that can move our students forward. And I know that some districts are offering some pretty big incentives just to lure some of those teachers away. And we need to hang on to them as long as we can. Isn't that right, Ms. Turner? But we need to, demonstrate that we appreciate what they do, and that compensation, if they have to work a second job or have to figure out another way of making ends meet, it's pretty tough. So we need that. This only helps, I think. And again, thank you for going through this and trying to figure this thing out. But if we can get it moving in the right direction, it will certainly help with recruitment of teachers. But thank you.
I don't have a question, but I have a concern. The Lexington 2 has published their proposed salary schedule, and it starts at $50,000. And I know that they don't have NARI, but NARI only applies, as you said, for 3 years. So, and I've looked at their schedule compared to ours, and ours in most cells is the same or higher for the master's plus and the doctorate. But the first two columns, the bachelor's and the bachelor's plus 18, we will be lower. And I'm really concerned because we have the money in this budget to bump those up. And I'm very concerned that if we're not at least on the same level that they are, that we could lose teachers. And also, as Mr. Satterfield said, it sends a message, too, that we value you. I'd like to make an amendment to the motion. So I move to amend the motion to remove the fund balance reassignment of $1.5 million for portables and remove the $1.2 million for ESSER 3 positions and use those funds to increase our bachelor's and our bachelor's plus 18 hours certified step salaries.
A second.
All right.
So I think I kind of explained why I want to do this, and I don't know, how the math would work out, but I think we should try. There's also extra money, as you mentioned, that may come, but also last year we, and I warned everyone that we didn't need that high a millage rate, but we did it, so that we got it. But in this budget, we have budgeted interest probably lower. I'm sure everybody wishes we would get back to 4% mortgages, but that's probably not going to happen. So we've budgeted interest lower than we will probably get, and again, we've budgeted the revenue from the tax revenue probably lower as well because we've got a really low collection rate in there compared to actual. So I think we need to use that. We need to use the portables and the ESSER money to do our best to, at the very least, match Lexington 2.
Any other discussion? All right, so there's a motion on the, yep.
Dr. Ross, can you use ESSER money for salaries? I mean, that would be a reoccurring expense, would it not?
I think using the portables, remember, the portables are one-time expense, I say.
Yeah.
So that would be a concern for us.
Yeah, and I appreciate what, the idea of trying to raise the salaries like that. My suggestion would be to wait until we finish this process that you're going through to analyze everything. I don't know that robbing Peter to pay Paul with the portables is the right way to do it. I mean, if the administration feels like the portables are a necessary purchase, I don't think that removing them or taking them out of the picture is a good idea. But my preference would be to wait until our CFO has a chance, Ms. Rawls has a chance to move through all this and make a recommendation, or at least give us enough input that we could make our own recommendation.
My understanding was this was the recommendation, that it's not going to change.
I agree. I mean, I think this is the first reading. I think we have a second reading, and if there is, I agree with Mr. Satterfield. I think throwing out a motion in a reading where you're changing a $240 million budget with the two different categories that you identified without having all of that actual information and what that looks like in reality, I'm not really in favor of that. I do share the concern about other districts and where, I mean, we've historically paid a little bit higher, I thought, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I have heard other school boards say that to us, that we're, I think it's a back and forth between all of the districts, especially in Lexington County. If there is a way to make that happen, and with the money that we have, and a recommendation of where those dollars come from the administration, that's something that I would like to see at another, at the next meeting, if that can be adjusted. But, I mean, that's just how I feel. Yeah, go ahead.
And I mean, I'm not against it. I guess my question would be, what would the impact be? Because it is a recurring expense. And while that money is in that budget now, it would be spent, therefore, the next year's budget and the following year. I don't think we could necessarily give it, then take it back.
But it is in the budget, Matt. I mean, Mr. Hogan, it is.
You can call me Matt,
Okay,
that's
the
cool.
1.5 million was in this year's budget, and the 1.2 million is in next year's budget. So it's in the budget. And, I mean, we're not going to have this chance again. I mean, why would we retain these positions which we knew were going to go away? And we have a chance to pay our teachers at least on par with a neighboring school district. I mean, I've looked at the last 3 years, y'all, the percent of our budget that goes to instruction has decreased. If with this budget, it'll be the third consecutive decrease, and it's little tiny percent. But, I mean, don't our teachers deserve this? Don't we?
I think that they do. I think you're kind of sensationalizing it a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of priorities. We are tasked with making really hard decisions. If there is a way to shift this around, and it is recommended by the folks that are doing this day in and day out, I would like to see that. But I do think that sometimes we're going to have to put money, in different areas. And, when we're being presented this at a meeting without actually seeing that, I mean, I'd like to see what they come back with, Ms. Snipes.
I agree with Rebecca, and I don't think that anyone up here doesn't want to pay our teachers as much as we can. But even with your motion, you still said, I don't know how we work the numbers. So I think it would be a little crazy for us to vote for something when even you yourself are saying, we don't know how we work the numbers.
Well, I'm just
not
saying use it.
comfortable.
I'm just saying use it.
I just don't think I'm comfortable with that without, to your point, if that was possible without a more formalized, presentation from the district on how we do that. Because I don't think the issue is whether or not we want to pay teachers more money, but if we're going to vote on something like that, I think we want to know, how do we do that? And to Matt's point, you don't want to give it and take it back. How do we sustain it long-term? I think that's, fair.
And everybody's, we have different thoughts, so, I mean,
And the money
opinions.
is in the budget, there's no question about that, but we would be giving up all of the mental health supports and counselors that we have invested in for the students. So I think you would just, it's whatever priority you all address. Sure, the money can be shifted, however, that's what the priority was, and we were maintaining that priority.
Go ahead. Everybody, one more, not one more, Mr. Scully and Mr. Hogan, and then I'm trying to give everybody one chance to spot. You're good? Mr. Hogan?
But just to make sure what I heard you, by reallocating that ESSER funding, that would pull the money that we would have set aside for the mental health workers that are in our school as a result of COVID, that we're wanting to continue with positions, correct?
They would be continued on a temporary time-limited position that you all would reauthorize every year. However, it is the clinical counselors that were hired and have been working with the students.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm going to call for, we have a motion on the table for the first reading approval of the 24-25 general budget.
My amendment
Nope,
was
we have the
first.
amendment, my bad. We have Ms. Huddle's amendment first to shift the numbers around. So I'm saying that because I don't remember the exact wording of your motion, Ms. Huddle. Does anybody need that motion repeated? Okay. Mr. Satterfield? Yeah, Ms.
If
Huddle,
you don't
can
mind repeating the motion.
Sure. I
Thank you.
move to amend the motion, which was the budget approval, to remove the fund balance reassignment of $1.5 million for portables and to remove the $1.2 million for ESSER 3 positions and use those funds to increase our bachelor's and bachelor's plus 18 hours certified step salaries.
All right, so I'm going to take a motion on the vote. All in favor, or I had a moment, a vote on the motion, Ms. Huddle's motion. All in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion, say aye. All opposed? Abstaining? All right, so that motion fails 4-2 to 1 abstention. And we have an original motion on the table to approve the 24-25 budget for first
Miss-
reading.
I have some questions before we vote on that.
Okay.
Okay. And they just weren't covered in the presentation, so bear with me one second. There's $200,000 budgeted for instruction, 100, just wondering what that is. It was never, it was new, I didn't see that before.
Yes, ma'am, that is $100,000 that can be used in purchase services. If, for instance, a teacher cannot be found to fill a position, there are funds available in purchase services to hire a contractor. It may be a psychologist, it may be any other type position. However, it is there. It would have to be approved. If the board is approving budget transfers, it would have to be approved to be assigned to the correct function.
Okay. And then last year, for this year, actually, we approved a program called Capturing Kids' Hearts for $500,000. Is that program in this budget, and if so, where?
I'm sorry. That was ESSER funded. And $417,000, so that would be included in the $525,000 transferred from the ESSER into general fund for this year. It was in the presentation.
Does that get approved every year?
Hold on.
Those funds are expended, they're our ESSER funds, and they're part of that ESSER 3 that we talked about earlier that will all be expended for by the September 30th deadline. So they are not a carryover or an addition to the 24-25 budget.
So are we discontinuing that program?
Part of the deal, the contractual agreement is that we would learn from this, take the year to learn from that, and we will continue on our own as a district with implementing and applying the tenets that we learned from the Capturing Kids Heart. But it would be without the direct instruction, if you will, from the staff or the representatives of that organization.
Okay, so there's no money in here for Capturing Kids' Hearts. Okay. One other question. Under Gifted and Talented, under Purchase Services, our budget was $3.1 million for this year. We only spent, the projected is only 1.6, and then the proposed budget goes back to $3 million. So just kind of wondering what that swing is all about there.
That's under the special programs. The Gifted and Talented is function 148 above that. So this is under the special programs. And I'd be happy to research that and get it back to you. I don't have
Oh,
the
I
specific
see, the,
information.
okay, yeah, the gift and, okay, so this is special programs.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, that was it, thank you.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, I'm going to call for the vote to approve the first reading of this budget. All in favor? All opposed? All right, that motion carries 5-2, and that brings us to item 15 on our action agenda, which is the approval of OFS, Office of Federal and State Accountability Waiver Form, Exhibit G.
Dr. Harris?
Need a motion?
Yes, can I have a motion, Mr. Hogan?
I'd like to make a motion the board approves the Office of Federal and State Accountability Waiver Request to ensure full implementation of the approved district strategic plan or school renewal plan.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes. All right. Dr. Harris for discussion.
Thank you. This is an opportunity for us with the approval of the waiver to, in at least 3 of our high schools, to continue with the quality of instruction that students are receiving, as well as adhering to those goals and objectives that are listed, as Mr. Hogan indicated, in our strategic plan.
Okay. Do I have any questions for Dr. Harris? Ms. Huddle?
The teachers that teach the extra minutes, do they get compensated for that?
Yeah, they do, yes.
Extra compensation for that?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we have a motion on the table. I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of the waiver? That motion carries 6-0. Mr. Scully has stepped out.
Okay,
Thank you, Dr. Harris.